The winter in Chicago doesn't just freeze you, it bites. It gets into your bones and stays there. But it had nothing on the cold that flooded my veins at 2:47 a.m. when the VIP patient rolled through the double doors of Mercy General. Not a drill, a full code. Dr. Sarah Mitchell barked orders. Defibrillator whining, wheels screaming against the tile, the absolute chaos of a trauma bay trying to keep a ghost inside its body. I stood just outside the glass panel. My hands were steady. They are always steady now. I trained them to be. I am Carter Hayes, pediatric charge nurse. I deal with broken things every day. But the man on the gurney wasn't just broken. He was Julian Vance, billionaire, CEO, the man who systematically erased my existence 7 years ago. Hi viewers, have you ever looked into the eyes of the man who completely shattered your world, only to realize he's been handed to you on a silver platter? Drop your answer in the comments. The talks panel took 6 agonizing hours. Synthetic poison. Calculated. Someone had tried to slowly turn off Julian's lights. They failed, but the side effects were catastrophic. Retrograde amnesia, Dr. Mitchell said softly, standing with me outside room 412. She ran a hand through her exhausted hair. The neuroblockers in the toxin fried his short-term and long-term recall. He's medically stable. His heart is beating. But the hard drive, it's completely wiped. He doesn't know what year it is. He doesn't know who he is. She tapped her clipboard, looking down the hallway. I need to call the CDC and the hospital board. Watch him, Carter. She walked away, leaving me alone with him. 7 years ago, I had nothing. No money, no apartment. Just 2 premature babies in the NICU and a hospital discharge paper I signed with a shaking hand. Julian Vance had looked at me back then with eyes like chips of ice, handing his lawyers a stack of forged documents that pushed me out into the freezing snow. I built my life back from the wreckage. Mason and Logan, my boys, my world. And now the architect of my ruin was lying in a hospital gown, strapped to a heart monitor, looking like something fragile. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of bleach and sterile cotton. Julian was awake. He was staring at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling, breathing shallowly. He turned his head when I walked in. His eyes locked onto mine, the same steel gray, but the arrogance gone. The absolute unbending power that used to suffocate a room vanished. He looked entirely empty. Who? His voice was rough, scraped out of a dry throat. Who am I? I stopped at the foot of his bed. I should have called hospital security. I should have paged the administration. I should have handed him a phone and told him to dial his army of ruthless lawyers. But I didn't. 3 seconds. That's how long it took. 3 seconds for 7 years of bone-deep exhaustion, of working double shifts, of buying off-brand formula, of answering my sons when they asked why they didn't have another dad, to curdle into something cold and dark inside my chest. It wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud. Revenge is messy. This was something else. This was taking control. I reached into my scrub pocket and pulled out my worn notepad. The same notepad I use when my voice isn't enough. I clicked my pen. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. I wrote 3 lines. My handwriting was sharp, precise. I walked up to the side of his bed. I ripped the page out. I didn't say a word. I just slapped the paper right onto the center of his chest. Julian flinched, looking down at the note. He read it aloud, his voice trembling slightly. You are a nursing intern. You owe me $50,000. Your shift starts in 5 minutes. Julian looked up at me, confusion warring with a deep buried instinct of defiance. Intern, he rasped. I don't feel like an intern. Nobody does, I replied. My voice was completely flat. Get up. I turned to the supply cart near the sink. I picked up a light blue, heavy-duty plastic medical bedpan, the kind used for patients who can't walk to the bathroom. It was cold. It was undignified. I turned back and shoved it hard against his chest, forcing his hands to come up and grab it. He held the plastic pan. The billionaire. The ruthless CEO. He looked from the pan to me, his jaw clenching. He wanted to fight. I could see the ghost of Julian Vance trying to claw its way up his throat. But without his memories, without his money, he was just a confused man holding a plastic bucket. I pointed to the door. Room 4, patient vomited. Clean it! I didn't wait for a response. I turned my back on him and walked out of the room in my rubber-soled shoes silent on the linoleum. I didn't look back, but I heard the rustle of the hospital gown. I heard the hesitant bare footsteps hit the floor. He was following me. The game had started. So viewers, what would you do if the man who threw you into the snow suddenly became your unpaid intern? What's the first chore you'd give him? Let me know down below. And stay tuned, because Julian Vance is about to find out that hell isn't fire and brimstone. It's white tiles, fluorescent lights, and a pediatric ward at 3 a.m. The pediatric ward at 4 a.m. is a specific kind of purgatory. It's not the loud, adrenaline-fueled chaos of the ER. It is a slow, methodical, bone-deep grind. It smells like industrial bleach, sour milk, and exhausted parents. Julian Vance knew boardrooms. He knew private jets. He knew how to break a rival company before his morning espresso. He did not know how to handle a biohazard spill in room 12. He was wearing oversized blue scrubs I had pulled from the emergency donation bin. They swallowed his broad shoulders and hung awkwardly around his waist. He looked ridiculous. He looked completely stripped of his armor. I stood at the nurse's station perfectly still, watching him stare at a puddle of regurgitated strawberry gelatin and formula on the linoleum floor. He held a mop in his hands like it was an alien artifact. He looked from the yellow plastic handle down to the floor, his jaw tight. The arrogant instinct was still there. Amnesia doesn't erase your ego, it just misplaces the instruction manual. I could see his muscles tensing. He was 1 second away from dropping the mop and demanding to speak to management. I didn't give him the chance. I walked over. My rubber-soled shoes made absolutely no sound. I stopped right beside him. I pulled my worn notepad from my pocket, clicked my pen. I wrote 3 words, tore off the sheet, and pressed it flat against the wall next to him. "Clean it up." Julian turned to me. His steel gray eyes flashed with a sudden sharp indignation. "Look," he rasped, his voice still gravelly from the intubation. "I don't know who I am, but I'm absolutely certain I don't clean up this." I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I just clicked my pen again. I wrote another line on the pad and held it up to his face. "You owe me $50,000. Start mopping, intern." He stared at the paper, then he stared at me. He was looking for a weakness, a crack in my armor, a sign that this was a joke. He found nothing. 7 years of raising twins alone had frozen my patience into solid ice. A billionaire with no memories wasn't going to melt it. Hi viewers, have you ever had to train a new coworker who thought they were entirely too good for the job? How fast did you humble them? Drop a comment below. Let's compare notes. Julian gritted his teeth. A muscle feathered in his jaw. But my silence was a pressure vacuum he couldn't fight. Slowly, agonizingly, the CEO of Vance Holdings lowered the mop into the bucket of bleach water. He squeezed the wringer. He started to clean. It was agonizing to watch. He was inefficient. He was clumsy. But I didn't step in to help. For the next 3 hours, I dragged Julian Vance through the white hell of the pediatric night shift. When a 3-year-old with a stomach bug soiled his bedsheets, I handed Julian a pair of latex gloves and a biohazard bag. When the medication carts needed to be restocked, I made him push the heavy steel trolley down the quarter-mile hallway. Twice, because he organized the vials wrong the first time. I never raised my voice. I never scolded him. I just used the notepad. Red bag for biohazard. Try again. Room 8 needs a sponge bath. The silence was breaking him faster than any yelling could. By 6:15 a.m., the fluorescent lights in the hallway seemed to hum louder, signaling the approaching dawn. The shift was almost over. I found Julian in the tiny 3x3 meter staff break room. He was sitting on a cheap plastic chair, slumped forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He looked utterly destroyed. The sterile smell of the hospital was baked into his skin. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him. He lifted his hands, staring at them under the harsh light. The hands that had signed the forged documents. The hands that had authorized the legal maneuvers that pushed a vulnerable recovering nurse and 2 premature babies out into the Chicago winter. Now those hands were raw, red, the skin pruned and cracked from harsh chemical sanitizers and constant washing. They were shaking slightly from sheer physical exhaustion. He looked up. He saw me standing there. There was no anger left in his eyes, just a hollow, desperate confusion. "Why does it feel like this?" he whispered into the quiet room. I didn't move. I pulled out my pen, but I didn't write anything. I waited. The handwriting, Julian muttered, rubbing his temple, his brow furrowed in pain. "Your handwriting. The way you look at me. It feels heavy, like I should know exactly why you hate me." He swallowed hard. "Who am I to you?" My breath hitched. Just a fraction, a tiny microscopic betrayal of the iron wall I had built. He didn't remember his name, his company, or his fortune, but some buried, fractured piece of his soul remembered the guilt. The body keeps the score even when the brain is wiped clean. I looked at him, really looked at him. The architect of my ruin sitting in cheap scrubs, smelling like bleach, asking me to give him the answers he had stolen from himself. I stepped fully into the room. I ripped a blank page from my notepad. I placed it face down on the small table in front of him. I leaned in close enough that he could hear the absolute zero temperature in my voice. The first time I had spoken to him since I told him to get up. "You're the intern," I said softly, "and your shift is over. Go to sleep." I turned and walked out of the break room. The game was no longer just about revenge. It was about survival, and Julian Vance was about to meet the two most dangerous people in my world. So what do you think? Did I go too easy on him for his first night? If you had your worst enemy at your mercy, completely amnesiac, what chores would you assign them? Let me know. Stay tuned, because in the next act, the intern is about to clock in for a shift he can't handle. The twins are coming to the hospital, and 6-year-olds, they don't take prisoners. The weather alerts started flashing on the monitors around 8 p.m. A lake-effect snowstorm, whiteout conditions. Chicago wasn't just freezing, it was shutting down. My phone buzzed in my scrub pocket. Mrs. Higgins. She had brought Mason and Logan to the hospital early to beat the road closures. They were safely tucked in the East Wing family lounge. I had 40 minutes left on my shift, and I had one intern to check on. I found Julian in the sub-supply room just down the hall from the lounge. I had given him the most tedious job on the floor, untangling and sorting pediatric IV lines. It was a job that required infinite patience. Julian Vance did not have patience. He had capital, but capital couldn't untangle plastic tubing. I didn't walk in. I stopped just outside the half-open door, because Julian wasn't alone. Mason and Logan had wandered out of the lounge. They were standing perfectly parallel to each other, two 6-year-olds with messy dark hair, assessing the 6'2" billionaire sitting on a low plastic stool. Julian looked up from the tangled mess of plastic. He stared at the boys. The boys stared back. "You're doing it wrong," Logan said. His voice was entirely flat. He sounded exactly like me. Julian's brow furrowed. The CEO instinct flared, fighting through the amnesia. "Excuse me." "The green caps go in the left bin," Mason added, pointing a small finger. "Carter says so. You're gonna get in trouble." At the name Carter, Julian flinched. Just a micro-expression, a tightening of the shoulders. He looked at the boys, then at the bins. He slowly moved a green-capped tube to the left. "Good job, intern," Logan said. Hi viewers, have you ever seen two first graders psychologically dominate a Fortune 500 CEO because it is a highly specific, highly satisfying genre of comedy? Drop a heart in the comments if you think kids are the ultimate boss material. I leaned against the wall out of sight. I should have intervened. It was a hospital, not a daycare, but my feet refused to move. Julian sighed, rubbing his raw, overwashed hands over his face. "Are you two supposed to be in here?" "We're waiting for our dad," Mason said. He stepped closer, eyeing Julian. "You look tired. Carter makes everyone tired. Are you scared of him?" Julian paused. He looked at the door, dropping his voice a fraction. "I'm medically advised not to cross him." "Smart," Logan nodded gravely. "If you get us a snack from the machine, we won't tell him you put the blue tubes in the wrong box." Extortion, pure, unadulterated extortion from a 6-year-old. I pressed my hand to my mouth to kill the sound of my laugh. Julian stared at them. A man who negotiated hostile takeovers for breakfast was currently being blackmailed for potato chips. And the worst part, he didn't know how to fight back. He had no memory of how to deal with children. "Fine," Julian muttered. He stood up. He actually stood up. He patted his scrub pockets. Empty. "I don't have any money." "The machine takes Apple Pay," Mason supplied helpfully. "But you don't have a phone, so you have to shake it. The machine, not the phone." "I am not shaking a vending machine," Julian said, his voice finding a trace of its old aristocratic steel. "Okay, we'll go find Carter." Logan turned toward the door. "Wait," Julian snapped. He walked out into the hallway. The boys trailed behind him like ducklings. I shadowed them from a distance, staying behind the corner. I watched Julian Vance, a man worth $3 billion, square his shoulders, plant his feet, and deliver a perfectly calculated hip check to the hospital vending machine. A bag of cheese puffs fell. Mason cheered quietly. They sat back down in the supply room. Julian handed them the bag. He didn't go back to the IV lines. He just sat on his stool, resting his elbows on his knees, watching them eat. The tension in his shoulders was gone. The defensive wall he had built since waking up without a past seemed to dissolve in the presence of these two tiny, demanding strangers. "Why do you look at us like that?" Mason asked around a mouthful of cheese puffs. Julian tilted his head. "Like what?" "Like you're trying to remember a movie you saw a long time ago," Logan observed. Julian's breath hitched. He looked at Logan, then at Mason. He looked at the shape of their eyes, the line of their jaws. Then Logan squinted. It was the exact same squint Julian used right before he decimated a rival in a boardroom. I knew it intimately. "You look like us," Logan said slowly. The observation hung in the air. "Are you a clone? I saw a movie about clones. They wake up and they don't know who they are." Julian froze. His steel gray eyes, identical to the ones staring back at him, widened slightly. He didn't know what to say. His brain was empty, but his body was vibrating with a frequency he couldn't name. He lowered his hand to the metal table. He didn't speak. He just looked at the boys, completely overwhelmed. And then, entirely unconsciously, Julian's index finger tapped against the metal. 1, 2, 3. His finger made 3 distinct tapping sounds. My blood turned to ice. 3 taps. The secret code I taught the boys. The physical sign for "I'm okay" when words were too hard. Julian didn't know what he was doing. He was just a man lost in the dark, soothing himself. But his body remembered. The genetic echo. The instinct. Mason and Logan stopped chewing. They looked at Julian's hand. Then they looked at each other. I couldn't let it go any further. I couldn't let them connect the dots. Not here. Not like this. I stepped out from the shadow of the door frame. "Mason, Logan." My voice was a whip crack in the quiet room. All 3 of them jumped. Julian shot up from the stool, instantly defensive, the cheese puffs forgotten. The intern was back on the clock. The boys ran to me, wrapping their arms around my legs. I put my hands on their heads, anchoring them, anchoring myself. I looked at Julian. He was staring at my hands on the boy's hair. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. He looked terrified, not of me, but of the gaping hole in his chest that suddenly felt like it belonged to the 2 little boys hugging my knees. Amnesia can wipe the hard drive. It can erase the bank accounts, the titles, the sins. But it can't erase the blood. The body keeps the score. I didn't use the notepad this time. "Go clean, room 12. I told him, my voice completely devoid of warmth. Julian didn't argue. He walked past me, his eyes lingering on the boys for 1 second too long. "What about you viewers? Do you think instinct is stronger than memory? Could you recognize your own blood, even if your mind was completely blank? Let me know in the comments. And brace yourselves, because the storm outside is nothing compared to what's about to hit the pediatric ward. In Act 4, the power grid fails, the amnesia cracks, and Julian Vance is about to remember exactly what he destroyed. The blizzard hit its peak at 2:14 a.m. The wind didn't just howl against the reinforced glass of Mercy General, it screamed. Then the lights flickered, once, twice. A heavy metallic noise echoed through the walls as the main grid failed. The hospital plunged into absolute darkness for 3 terrifying seconds before the emergency backup generators kicked in, bathing the corridors in a sickly, dim amber glow. And then the alarm sounded. Not a standard call button, not a simple page. It was the high-pitched, relentless screech of a code blue. Code blue. NICU, room 3. Neonatal intensive care. My blood turned to Freon. I sprinted. I didn't check on Mason and Logan. They were asleep in the lounge safe. I didn't check on my intern. I just ran. The rubber of my shoes skidded against the linoleum as I took the corner to the east wing. Room 3 was pure, unadulterated chaos. A 26-week-old premature baby. Respiratory failure. The backup power surge had tripped the incubator's primary ventilator. The tiny chest wasn't moving. The monitor was screaming a flat, deadly tone. Dr. Mitchell was already there, her hands flying over the controls. A junior nurse, fresh out of rotation and panicked by the blackout, bumped into a tray of sterilized instruments. It crashed to the floor. The noise shattered the remaining focus in the room. "I need a manual resuscitator. Now!" Dr. Mitchell yelled, her voice bordering on frantic. I shoved past the frozen junior nurse. I grabbed the infant ambu bag. I wedged myself next to the incubator. I placed 2 fingers on the infant's sternum. Tiny, fragile, like a baby bird. I started the compressions. 1, 2, 3, breathe. "Carter, the crash cart is stuck in the hall," someone shouted. Panic is a virus. It spreads faster than any infection. The room was dissolving. And then a voice cut through the noise. "Stop." It wasn't a yell. It was a command. A low, vibrating frequency that demanded absolute biological compliance. I didn't stop my compressions, but my eyes darted to the door. Julian Vance was standing there. He was still wearing the ridiculous, oversized blue scrubs. He still smelled like bleach, but the posture was different. The confusion was gone. The intern was dead. The CEO had entered the room. He didn't touch the medical equipment. He knew he wasn't qualified. Instead, he took control of the one thing he understood better than anyone on Earth, the logistics of human panic. He pointed a long, commanding finger at the junior nurse. "You, pick up the tray, move to the corner, do not speak." He turned to the two orderlies hovering uselessly in the doorway. "Clear this entrance, go to the hall, lift the back wheels of the crash cart over the threshold cable and bring it to Dr. Mitchell's left hand. You have 5 seconds. Move." They moved. Instantly, Julian stepped fully into the room, his presence a heavy gravitational anchor. He stood out of the way, but his eyes locked onto the room, holding the chaos at bay through sheer force of will. Hi viewers, have you ever seen a person's core programming override their brain damage? It doesn't look like a miracle. It looks like a weapon firing. Drop a comment if you've ever had to step up when everyone else fell apart. I turned back to the baby. My world narrowed down to the tiny translucent chest under my fingers. The amber emergency lights cast deep shadows over the incubator, the rhythmic sound of the ambu bag, the beeping of the failing heart monitor. "Come on," I whispered, my voice cracked. "Come on, little one, don't quit." I was hyper-focused, but out of my peripheral vision, I saw Julian step closer to the glass. He looked at the baby, then he looked at me. He looked at my face, illuminated by the harsh blue LED lights of the medical monitors. He saw the desperation in my eyes. He saw my hands moving rhythmically, fighting death for a child that wasn't mine. And then I heard it. A sharp, ragged gasp, like a man breaching the surface of the ocean after drowning. I didn't look up. I couldn't. 1, 2, 3, breathe. But I heard Julian stumble. His heavy work shoes scraped clumsily against the floor. The image of me leaning over an incubator in the blue light wasn't just a crisis. It was a key. A fatal, perfectly shaped key sliding into the locked door of his mind. 7 years ago, a different hospital, a different storm. Me standing over 2 incubators, holding my own chest, weeping silently while his lawyers handed me eviction papers in the waiting room. A scene he had witnessed from the end of the hall before he turned his back and walked onto his private jet. The amnesia didn't just crack. It detonated. A series of steady beeps sounded. The monitor jumped. A steady rhythm. The baby let out a weak, furious, beautiful cry. "We have a pulse, vital stabilizing," Dr. Mitchell exhaled, slumping against the counter. The room collectively breathed. The crisis was over. I stepped back from the incubator, my hands shaking violently. I wiped a layer of cold sweat from my forehead. I turned around. Julian Vance was on the floor. He was on his knees. His hands were tangled in his dark hair, pulling violently. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and staring at the linoleum. He was shaking, not a tremor, a full-body convulsion of sheer, unadulterated horror. He wasn't looking at a puddle of vomit. He wasn't looking at IV lines. He was looking at the last 7 years. He remembered his name. He remembered his empire. And he remembered exactly what he had done to the man standing in front of him. "Julian," Dr. Mitchell asked, stepping toward him confused. Julian didn't hear her. He slowly lifted his head. His steel gray eyes met mine. The arrogance was gone. The emptiness was gone. All that was left was the agonizing, crushing weight of a soul that had just realized it was in hell. "Carter," he whispered. It was a plea, a broken, shattered sound. I didn't reach for my notepad. I didn't hand him a mop. I just looked down at him, my face a mask of absolute unforgiving ice. "Welcome back, Mr. Vance," I said. "So what happens when the villain remembers he's the villain? Do you think the guilt will destroy him, or will he try to buy his way out again? Let me know in the comments. And don't go anywhere, because in Act 5, the man who poisoned Julian is about to walk into this hospital, and he has no idea that the billionaire he tried to kill is currently armed with a toilet brush. The immediate aftermath of a shattered mind is not loud. It is brutally, uncomfortably silent. After Julian collapsed in the NICU, after the agonizing realization of what he had done washed over him, he didn't scream. He simply fractured. Dr. Mitchell, entirely focused on the stabilized premature baby, didn't notice the billionaire having a psychological breakdown on the linoleum. I didn't offer him a hand. I didn't offer him comfort. "Go back to your room," I told him. My voice was a flat line. He went. He practically dragged himself down the corridor, a ghost in oversized blue scrubs. I gave him 1 hour. 1 hour to sit in room 412 and let the weight of 7 years crush the air out of his lungs. The storm outside was finally breaking. The morning light filtering through the reinforced windows was gray and unforgiving. My shift was over. It was time to formally end the internship. It was time to call the police, call his lawyers, and throw him back into the world he came from. I was walking toward room 412 when the elevator doors chimed. A man stepped out. He didn't belong on the pediatric floor. You develop a radar for these things after 7 years. Parents look exhausted. Doctors look focused. This man looked like a predator walking into a cage where he knew the lion was already dead. Cashmere overcoat, custom-tailored suit, expensive Italian leather shoes leaving faint, wet footprints on the newly buffed floor. Marcus Thorne. I recognized his face from the financial pages. Vance Holdings' biggest rival, and according to the whispers in the trauma bay 3 days ago, the prime suspect in the poisoning of Julian Vance. The chaos of the blackout had left the security desk temporarily unmanned. Marcus had slipped right through. He didn't look at me. I was just a nurse in faded scrubs. Invisible. He walked straight toward room 412. He pushed the door open without knocking and slipped inside. Hi, viewers. Have you ever watched a villain walk confidently into a trap they didn't know was set? It is a highly specific, highly entertaining aesthetic. Drop a comment if you live for instant karma. I didn't hit the panic button. Not yet. I walked silently to the door of room 412. It was cracked open by an inch. I listened. Well, 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 Marcus's voice slithered through the gap, smug, oozing with artificial pity. Look at the great Julian Vance, the Titan of Chicago. They told me the poison scrambled your brain, that you were practically a vegetable. I just had to come see it for myself. Silence from inside the room. I nudged the door open just a fraction more. Marcus was standing in the center of the room, his hands in his expensive coat pockets, a triumphant smirk plastered on his face. He was looking at Julian. But Julian wasn't in bed. He wasn't hooked up to monitors. Julian was standing by the small bathroom door. In his left hand, he held a bright yellow plastic bucket filled with soapy water. In his right hand, he held a heavy-duty, thoroughly used toilet brush. He had been cleaning, because those were the last orders I gave him before the blackout. Marcus let out a low, mocking laugh. Is this a joke? Are they making you do chores? Do you even know who I am, Julian? Do you know who put you in this pathetic little box? Julian didn't move. He looked down at the toilet brush. Then he looked up at Marcus. The eyes that met Marcus Thorne's were not the confused, empty eyes of the intern. They were absolute predatory steel. The amnesia was gone. The brain damage was a myth. The CEO of Vance Holdings was fully entirely online. Marcus, Julian said. His voice wasn't gravelly anymore. It was a perfectly calibrated blade. Your timing is incredibly inconvenient. Marcus froze. The smirk evaporated. The color drained from his face so fast he looked translucent. You remember? I remember that you're an amateur, Julian said softly. He took a step forward. I remember that you used a synthetic neuroblocker that leaves a traceable metabolic footprint. And I remember that my lawyers are currently freezing your offshore accounts while we speak. Marcus took a step back, his bravado crumbling into sheer panic. He opened his mouth to speak, to threaten to deny. Julian didn't let him. With the casual, dismissive arrogance of a man who just bought a company to fire its board, Julian shoved the dripping, dirty toilet brush directly against the lapel of Marcus's pristine cashmere coat. Hold this idiot! Julian snapped his tone, echoing the exact way I had spoken to him all week. Can't you see I'm working step off my freshly mopped floor? Marcus let out a startled, disgusted sound, instinctively grabbing the plastic handle of the brush to keep it from smearing his tie. He stood there, a supposed criminal mastermind, holding a toilet brush like a confused peasant. I couldn't help it. I pushed the door fully open and stepped into the room. Both men snapped their heads toward me. Marcus looked at me wildly, then back to Julian, then down at the brush in his hand. His brain was short-circuiting. I reached for my pager and hit the security sequence. 3 short beeps echoed in the room. Security is on the way, Mr. Thorne. I said, my voice completely devoid of amusement. You are holding biohazardous hospital property. Please, put it down. Marcus dropped the brush. It hit the floor with a wet slapping sound. He looked terrified, completely out of his depth. He didn't say another word. He turned and practically sprinted out of the room straight into the arms of 2 hospital guards rushing down the hall. The door swung shut. The comedic energy vanished in a microsecond. The room slammed back into reality. I was left standing alone with Julian Vance. He looked at the puddle of dirty water on the floor. Then he slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. The arrogance he had just weaponized against Marcus dissolved instantly. The billionaire CEO was gone again. The ruthless businessman vanished. He was just a man looking at the person he had broken. And Carter G, he breathed. It wasn't a demand. It was an apology that didn't know how to form itself. I didn't pull out my notepad. I didn't give him another chore. I just looked at him, feeling the absolute exhaustion of 7 years settling into my bones. The intern's shift was over. The reckoning had begun. So, what do you think? Was a toilet brush too good for Marcus Thorne? Let me know in the comments how you would have handled the villain's monologue. And don't scroll away, because in Act 6, the hospital room doors are locked. It's just Carter and Julian in a tiny break room, and it's time to pay the bill for the last 7 years. The police arrived exactly 9 minutes later. Marcus Thorne did not go quietly, but he went. The sight of a billionaire pharmaceutical rival being marched through the pediatric ward in a cashmere coat screaming about toilet brushes and framed evidence was a surreal conclusion to the night. But I didn't watch him leave. The spectacle didn't matter to me, because the real threat wasn't in handcuffs. The real threat was standing behind me smelling of bleach and holding the entire weight of his returned memory. I didn't speak to Julian in the hallway. I turned on my heel and walked straight to the staff break room. 3 square meters, a humming mini fridge, a chipped plastic table, fluorescent lights that flickered with a low, irritating buzz. It was a space designed for exhaustion, not confrontation. I walked in and leaned against the counter. I crossed my arms. I waited. The door opened. Julian stepped inside. He closed it behind him. The click of the latch sounded like a vault sealing shut. I braced myself for the explosion. The CEO of Vance Holdings was back online. The amnesia was gone. He knew exactly who he was, the empire he commanded, and the unbelievable indignity I had put him through. I had forced a multi-billionaire to mop up vomit. I had made him push medication carts. I had treated him like an incompetent peasant. I expected threats. I expected him to pull out a phone call his army of corporate lawyers and have my nursing license revoked before sunrise. I expected the arrogant, ruthless Julian Vance from 7 years ago to tear this tiny room apart. But he didn't shout. He didn't reach for a phone. He just stood there. He looked at the cheap linoleum floor, then slowly he raised his hands. He stared at his palms. They were red, raw. The skin was cracked from 5 days of harsh industrial sanitizers, cheap latex gloves, and relentless friction. The hands of a man who moved numbers on screens had been forced into the brutal, unglamorous reality of physical labor. 5 days, Julian whispered. His voice was different now. The gravelly confusion of the intern was gone. But it wasn't the sharp, commanding blade he had used against Marcus either. It was hollow, devastated. I didn't respond. I reached into my scrub pocket. My fingers wrapped around the familiar spiral wire of my notepad, the weapon I had used to break him. Julian saw the movement. He looked up. "Don't," he said softly. He took a single step forward. The room was too small. He took up all the oxygen. "Don't write anything, please. Just look at me." I didn't take the pad out, but my jaw set into a hard, unforgiving line. Hi viewers, have you ever braced yourself for a physical punch only to have the person drop to their knees? Instead, it completely short-circuits your nervous system. Drop a comment if you know that exact kind of emotional whiplash. I was furious. Julian continued, his eyes locked onto mine. The steel gray was entirely vulnerable. Every time you handed me that mop, every time you gave me a biohazard bag, every time you looked at me with that absolute freezing silence, I thought you were a monster. I thought it was cruel. He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. "And then the lights went out," he said, his voice dropping to a jagged rasp. "And I saw you over that incubator, and I remembered." He took a shaky breath. He looked around the tiny, depressing break room as if seeing the reality of my life for the first time. "You tricked me into cleaning up other people's messes for 5 days, Carter," Julian said. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "While you had to clean up the wreckage I created for 7 years. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't a defensive silence. It wasn't the silence of a man plotting his next move. It was the absolute crushing silence of a soul submitting to its own guilt. My fingers loosened their grip on the notepad in my pocket. For 7 years, I had held on to the image of Julian Vance as an impenetrable wall of ice, a man who signed eviction papers without blinking, a man who let me walk into a Chicago blizzard with 2 premature babies because recognizing them would have ruined his perfect, calculated life. But the man standing in front of me wasn't made of ice anymore. He was shattered. I didn't know. Julian choked out the composure, finally snapping. A single tear broke free, tracking down his tired face. When I signed those papers, when my lawyers pushed you out, I told myself it wasn't real. I told myself it was a lie you invented, because looking at the truth would have destroyed the empire I was building. Ignorance isn't an alibi, Julian, I said. My voice was a whisper. It was the first full sentence I had spoken to him in this room. It didn't sound angry. It sounded exhausted, bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. Ew, it's a choice. I continued, my eyes completely dry. You didn't look because it was inconvenient. You threw us away because we were a liability. I know. Julian didn't defend himself. He didn't offer excuses. He took the hit, letting the truth of my words bleed him out. It was a choice, and it was the greatest failure of my life. He looked at the door, then he looked back at me. Mason and Logan, he said the names like a prayer he wasn't allowed to speak. The vending machine, the 3 taps on the table, they are mine. I cut him off. My voice was a whip crack. I stepped forward, closing the distance, my maternal instinct flaring with violent intensity. They are mine. I built them. I raised them. I kept them breathing when you left us to freeze. Julian nodded slowly. He didn't fight me for ownership. He knew he had forfeited that right 7 years ago. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Carter, he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the fridge. I'm not asking to come back. I just needed you to know that I finally see exactly what I destroyed. He didn't wait for me to write anything. He didn't wait for a pardon. Julian Vance turned around, opened the door, and walked out of the break room. I stood there alone. The fluorescent lights flickered. The hum of the hospital continued. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the notepad. I stared at the blank page. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't know what to write. I didn't forgive him. The wound was too deep. The scars were too thick. But as I stood in the quiet room, feeling the phantom echo of his presence, I realized something terrifying. The wall of ice I had built around my heart hadn't melted, but for the very first time it had cracked. So, what do you think? Did Julian say enough? If the person who broke your life finally admitted exactly what they did, would you let them walk away, or would you pull them back in? Let me know your unfiltered thoughts in the comments. And get ready, because in Act 7 the intern is gone. The CEO is back in his tower, but Julian Vance is about to submit the most important application of his entire life. The world got Julian Vance back on a Tuesday. It took exactly 72 hours for him to systematically dismantle Marcus Thorne. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown. There were no shouting matches to the press. Julian simply walked into his glass-walled boardroom, picked up a phone, and initiated a financial slaughter. He froze Marcus's offshore accounts. He leaked the import records of the synthetic neuroblocker to the feds. He triggered a hostile takeover of Thorne Industries' primary supply chain before Marcus could even post bail. The news called it a masterclass in corporate warfare. I just called it a Tuesday. I didn't watch the press conferences. I didn't read the Financial Times. I went back to the pediatric ward. I checked IV lines. I held crying toddlers. I worked my shifts. The chaotic, fluorescent-lit rhythm of Mercy General swallowed me back whole. Julian didn't call. He didn't send a team of lawyers with a settlement check. He didn't send an apology carved in gold. He stayed away because he knew that bringing his world back into mine right now would have felt like an invasion. He was giving me the one thing he had never given me before space. Exactly 1 week later, the Chicago winter delivered another snowstorm. It was 11:15 p.m. The ward was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels fragile like glass. I was standing at the main nurse's station filing the night's transfer charts. My neck ached, my eyes burned. The double doors at the end of the hall slid open with a soft hissing sound. I didn't look up immediately. Visiting hours ended at 8. I said, my voice slipping into its standard flat professional tone. I'm not here as a visitor. My pen stopped moving. I looked up. Julian Vance was standing on the other side of the high counter. He wasn't wearing a custom Armani suit. He wasn't flanked by private security. He was wearing a heavy, dark wool coat to the collar turned up against the wind and a plain black sweater. Snow dusted his shoulders, melting slowly under the harsh hospital lights. He looked tired. He looked real. In his right hand, he held a cardboard drink carrier. Inside were 2 tall paper cups of coffee, not the expensive artisanal espresso from the cafe downtown. It was the cheap, burnt-smelling black coffee from the 24-hour gas station across the street. The exact kind I drank when I was running on empty. He didn't say anything else. He just set one of the cups on the counter and slid it across the smooth surface toward me. I looked at the cheap paper cup. Then I looked at the billionaire who had bought it. "You're out of uniform," I said evenly. My voice didn't shake. The ghost of a smile touched the corner of Julian's mouth. It wasn't arrogant. It was incredibly, devastatingly soft. "I know," he said. "I came to turn in my badge." He reached into the deep pocket of his wool coat. He didn't pull out a checkbook. He didn't pull out a legal contract. He pulled out a piece of paper. It was torn at the top, the jagged fringe of a cheap spiral-bound notepad. He placed it face down on the counter right next to the coffee. He kept his hand flat over it for a second, his knuckles white, before sliding it across to me. Julian stepped back from the counter. He gave me room. I looked at him. The steel gray eyes that matched the ones I saw at my dinner table every night were completely open. There were no walls left. He was standing there, stripped of all his corporate armor, offering me the only currency that mattered anymore: complete vulnerability. I picked up the paper. The handwriting wasn't sharp and perfect like his usual signature. It was a little uneven, written by a man who had spent the last week tearing down a rival empire, only to stay up all night writing a single sentence: interne Resignation. That was the header. Underneath it, written in dark blue ink, were 2 lines. "I am not asking to come back. I know I haven't earned the right, but can I submit an application to start as an acquaintance of Mason and Logan?" I stared at the words. For 7 years, I had held a shield over my chest. I had built a fortress out of anger, out of necessity, out of the sheer will to survive. I had looked at Julian Vance as a monster in the dark. But the monster was gone. The monster had spent 5 days mopping floors and untangling IV lines just to understand the weight of my life. The ice around my heart didn't shatter. Ice like that never shatters all at once. It melts, slowly, painfully. I didn't reach for my pen. I didn't write a reply. I put the piece of paper down. I picked up the cheap, burnt gas station coffee. The heat seeped through the cardboard, warming my fingers. I looked at Julian. He was holding his breath. The great, ruthless titan of Chicago was terrified. I rested my free hand on the counter, and then, looking directly into his eyes, I extended my index finger. I tapped 3 times against the laminate wood. "I'm okay. We're okay." Julian's breath left him in a ragged exhale. His shoulders dropped. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, and when he opened them, they were shining with something fierce and entirely unguarded. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. The road ahead of us was long, complicated, and incredibly messy. But it was a beginning. I took a sip of the coffee. It tasted terrible. It tasted like survival. "The application is under review, Mr. Vance," I said quietly. "Don't call us. We'll call you." Julian nodded slowly. A genuine quiet smile finally broke across his face. "I'll be waiting, Carter," he said softly. He didn't push. He didn't linger. He turned around and walked back down the hallway, disappearing through the double doors into the snowy Chicago night. I stood there alone, the hum of the hospital surrounding me. I looked at the torn piece of paper on the counter. Then carefully, I folded it and slipped it into my scrub pocket right next to my own notepad. The intern's shift was over, but I had a feeling the new applicant was going to be around for a very long time. So viewers, that's it. The shift is officially over. If the person who broke your heart finally proved they understood the damage, would you tap the table 3 times, or would you let them walk out into the snow? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story made you feel something real, hit that subscribe button, because out here, we don't just tell stories, we survive them. See you in the next one.